Have you ever realized that most of what people call a good life is actually meant to teach you to be more obedient, not more profound? That stability is often not a value at all, but a shell that conceals inner emptiness. Nietzsche would not be surprised if you find yourself exhausted in a life that looks perfect on the outside, yet hollow within. For Nietzsche, living well does not mean living gently. A good life only begins when you dare to live as an individual, not hiding behind tradition, not dissolving into the crowd, not borrowing meaning from others. You were not born to become the most acceptable version of yourself. You were born to take responsibility for the self that life is forcing you to become. This video is not positive advice meant to make you feel comfortable. It is a map to help you dismantle each layer of mental bondage, look straight at reality, confront suffering, sharpen instinct, open the mind, and patiently build yourself. The core steps Nietzsche considered the foundation of a life worthy of being called good. Do not skip any part, because if you understand Nietzsche only halfway, you will turn freedom into chaos and courage into recklessness. But if you go all the way, you will see this. A good life is not something you discover. It is something you are brave enough to create. Number 1. Living well is not living comfortably. Nietzsche saw clearly what most people deliberately refuse to see. Most of us do not live in order to become ourselves, but to avoid fear. Fear of failure, fear of being excluded from the herd, fear of judgment, fear that life will not be kind. And precisely because of fear, we choose a life that is called good, but is in truth nothing more than a carefully organized state of numbness. You wake up every morning, repeat familiar motions, say acceptable words, fulfill roles that make society nod in approval, and then lull yourself with a sentence that sounds mature, but is in fact deeply dangerous. Being okay is knowing when enough is enough. Nietzsche would not comfort you here. He would ask directly, whose okay is that? Is it yours? Or is it the okay of those who taught you that safety matters more than the truth of who you are? For Nietzsche, a good life is never a smooth life. It is not a state immune to chaos, risk, or uncertainty. A good life is a life chosen and signed by you with the full force of your will. And to dare to sign it, you must shed the borrowed values you are carrying, the things you live by, even though you no longer believe in them. Repeat even though you do not understand them. Obey simply because you fear being different. Human beings do not burn out from a lack of comfort. They burn out from living beneath their true capacity. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "Become who you are." That is not encouragement. It is a command. And that command reveals the essence of a good life. You were not born to become an acceptable copy. You were born to actualize a self for which only you can take responsibility. Nietzsche completely rejects the idea that living well means living comfortably. If comfort were the goal, animals would be more successful than humans. Eat, sleep, avoid danger. That is survival. But living well requires something survival does not: inner freedom. A free human being does not live according to the wishes of parents, religion, society, or the inherited commands of should and should not. They live according to their own will. They dare to say no to the path that thousands call good, and step onto the path whose call only they can hear. And they accept full responsibility for the self that takes shape through those choices. Nietzsche did not believe in the right path. He believed only in the path you are brave enough to walk, even when no one can walk it for you. The story of Ethan is a typical example of this modern tragedy. Nearly 8 years in a stable office job, Ethan was seen as fortunate by everyone. Steady pay, a pleasant environment, a secure future. But every night before sleep, he felt a tightness in his chest, not from exhaustion, but from the sense that he was not living. Ethan once wanted to make films, to create, to build something of his own. But year after year, he postponed it with a familiar phrase, "Later, I need to be stable first." Until the sudden death of a close friend forced him to face the truth, that so-called stability was merely fear wrapped in habit. Ethan left his job and began again in confusion and uncertainty. His life didn't become easier, but for the first time in many years, it was his life. And for Nietzsche, that alone is enough to call it a good life. And here, Nietzsche does not soothe you. He does not say that finding meaning is easy. He only says that running from the question of your life is more painful. The one who runs chooses a proper life, so the soul does not have to speak. They avoid conflict, risk, and uncertainty, and in doing so, they avoid themselves. The one who dares to live truthfully is different. They do not seek comfort. They accept truth. They do not ask, "What will others think?" but, "If I continue living like this, who am I becoming?" According to Nietzsche, living well is an existential choice, not an emotional state. Either you choose safety and lose yourself, or you choose freedom and accept the cost. But Nietzsche insists, there is no price higher than living the wrong life. And if you truly want to understand what a good life is, he will not give you many paths. He will only force you to stand before an unavoidable truth. Begin living as if you are the only one with the right to define the meaning of your life. Number 2, confront reality. Do not escape into imaginary worlds. Nietzsche did not only dismantle the illusion of a peaceful life, he attacked directly the psychological life preservers people cling to in order not to see themselves. For Nietzsche, you cannot live well if you are still fleeing reality. Every form of escape, no matter how sacred, moral, or noble it appears, is a denial of life. Not a denial through words, but through the refusal to stand before the truth of oneself. Nietzsche fiercely criticized all systems that pull humans away from reality, religions that promise heaven, doctrines that push meaning into an other world, consolations that turn the present into something merely to be endured. He clearly saw a familiar psychological mechanism. When life becomes uncomfortable, people do not change life. They invent another place to escape to and call it salvation. And to shatter this illusion, Nietzsche left behind a cold declaration in the gay science: God is dead. Not the death of a deity, but the death of a mechanism that made humans believe meaning existed somewhere beyond their reach. With this declaration, Nietzsche forced humanity to face an unavoidable truth. No one is coming to save you. There is no pre-assigned meaning, no cosmic blueprint. From this point on, either you create meaning for your life, or you will live forever in a void filled with imagination. Nietzsche called the flight from reality a form of slow suicide. Not the body dying, but the soul dying first. Humans have countless ways to anesthetize real pain. Alcohol, mindless prayer, comforting stories, the empty hope that one day everything will somehow get better. But escape does not make pain disappear. It only gives pain more time to consume you from within. Nietzsche was not against religion. He was against every form of evasion that makes humans deny their own inner strength. One metaphor Nietzsche often evokes is that of a person standing before a dust-covered mirror. They see their life as blurred, unclear, without direction. And instead of wiping the dust away, they choose to turn off the light so they do not have to see anything at all. But turning off the light does not remove the dust. It only makes you accustomed to darkness until you forget that you once had a face, once had a will, once had a self waiting to be seen. The story of Maria is a clear illustration of this tragedy. Maria, a teacher in her 30s, knew that her marriage had been dead for a long time. The couple shared a house, but no longer shared dialogue or touch. But instead of facing the truth, Maria buried herself in church, praying that God would fix her husband's heart. She believed that with enough endurance, everything would be saved. But as the years passed, the only thing that disappeared was herself. One day, after sitting alone in her car for more than an hour because she did not want to step into that house again, Maria touched what Nietzsche had said long ago. Illusion does not heal. It prolongs suffering. That day, she chose to confront reality. The conversation made her cry for hours. The decision to separate did not make her life easier. It only made it more real. And for Nietzsche, truth, however brutal, is always worth more than fabricated happiness. Nietzsche believed that no one lives well without the courage to look directly at the dark corners of their life. Debt, failure, mistakes, toxic relationships, wrong choices that have been dragged out too long. Humans have a strange reflex. They endure real pain for years, just to avoid a few minutes of facing the truth. But the truth does not disappear when you turn away. It stands there, waiting until you are strong enough to look at it. And the moment you dare to look is the true beginning of a good life. Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." He did not tell you to love suffering. He forced you to be strong enough not to need comforting illusions. Confronting reality is the first step of freedom. When illusion collapses, reality appears not to punish you, but to give you what no illusion ever can: the power to create your own life. If at this point you feel something shifting inside you, do not look for comfort. Write down what you have been avoiding, or the moment you are forced to confront yourself. Nietzsche always believed that honesty is the first step of all liberation. You are not writing for me. You are writing so that you can no longer lie to yourself. Number 3. Finding meaning in suffering. When a person has the courage to open their eyes and face reality, a deeper question inevitably emerges, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. If life necessarily contains suffering, then what makes us keep going? It is precisely here that Nietzsche pushes humanity into the deepest layer of existence, where suffering is no longer something to avoid, but something that must be given a meaning large enough to transform the one who bears it. Nietzsche did not see suffering as a sign of failure. He saw it as the raw material of a meaningful life. He once wrote a line that seems despairing, but is in fact the foundation of his existential thought. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in suffering. For Nietzsche, people do not collapse because of suffering. They collapse because they cannot find a reason to stand back up. Nietzsche understood this not because he reasoned better than others, but because his life was living proof. Chronic illness, prolonged loneliness, rejected love, broken relationships, misunderstood work, and darkness so deep that most people would have collapsed far earlier. But Nietzsche did not use suffering to resent life. He used it as a test. Can a human being turn pain into meaning? Here he placed one of his coldest ideas: amor fati, the love of one's fate. Amor fati is not a call to obedient endurance, it is a reversal. It means you do not merely accept what has happened, but affirm it as an indispensable part of becoming who you are. A strong soul does not say, "I wish this had not happened." They say, "It happened, and I will use it to grow larger." For Nietzsche, suffering is not an obstacle, it is material. Not something you overcome, but something you forge into new strength. Amor fati is freedom from the illusion that life must be easy to be meaningful. In Greek mythology, the journey of Psyche is the clearest image of this. When she lost Eros, she did not wait to be rescued or pray for miracles. Psyche had to pass through trials that seemed impossible, sorting mountains of seeds in a single night, taking golden wool from savage rams, drawing water from the river Styx, and descending into the realm of death itself. Nothing made the pain lighter, but the meaning she chose, the love she held, the person she wished to become, transformed pain into strength. Nietzsche would say, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Psyche did not endure because she was strong. She was strong because she had meaning. Modern science only confirms what Nietzsche saw more than a century ago. The ability to find meaning in suffering determines psychological resilience. Research on resilience shows that people who face adversity but possess a clear purpose recover faster, collapse less, and endure pressure more effectively. Meaning functions like a biological axis for the nervous system. It does not erase pain, but it prevents pain from destroying you from within. But Nietzsche did not stop at saying that meaning helps you survive. He forced you to look deeper. Meaning helps you live rightly. Living without meaning is like rowing in the open sea without knowing where you are heading. You may endure waves and wind, but every stroke is directionless. Living with meaning, according to Nietzsche, is not about finding something grand. It is about finding what you are willing to endure. What makes you accept the sacrifice of time, comfort, pride, and even old beliefs. Meaning is not happiness. It is the force that pulls you out of bed each morning. It does not exist beforehand. It is created from the very things that once hurt you. It may be accepting an unpaid position to learn a skill you know will shape who you become over the next 10 years. It may be staying with a project no one believes in, when you could choose a path that earns quicker praise. It may be continuing to train in silence, unrecognized, because you know exactly who you are becoming. A good life does not begin by avoiding suffering, but with an uncompromising question. What am I willing to endure in order to become myself? When you can answer that question, suffering is no longer the enemy. It becomes the teacher, the lifting force. And that is when you do not merely exist, you live with meaning. And when a person has found meaning to stand firm amid upheaval, another truth appears. The soul cannot mature if it continues to walk paths drawn by others. Meaning helps a person endure suffering, but only one's own goal allows them to move forward without losing themselves. Number 4. Pursuing your own goals, not living someone else's life. For Nietzsche, this is one of the most silent yet brutal tragedies of modern humanity. Not that people lack goals, but that the goals they pursue were never theirs. They belong to family, society, the collective, to invisible voices constantly whispering, "Be like everyone else so you can be accepted." Nietzsche called this state the dissolution into the herd, a disease more insidious than physical pain, because it kills the soul before a person realizes what has been lost. He once warned in Beyond Good and Evil, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you do not set your own direction, you will be pulled into the direction of others, silently." Nietzsche believed that losing one's purpose is a subtle form of decay. It erodes a person day by day. You still go to work, fulfill responsibilities, live a life called proper. But deep inside, your soul is suffocating under what he called herd morality, living to be accepted rather than living to become. A good life cannot be built on borrowed goals. It can only be born from the inner call, something only you can hear, even when the entire world is silent. The story of Jordan clearly illustrates this tragedy. Born into a family with 3 generations of doctors, Jordan was directed from an early age. He had to enter medical school, carry on the legacy, become a source of pride. And he did everything right. Disciplined, capable, successful. But every morning stepping into the hospital, Jordan felt as if he were stepping into someone else's life. One evening after a long shift, seeing a group of art students sketching passers-by, a stark truth emerged. He had never lived his own life. Art was where his heart belonged, but he had left it behind to be a good son. The decision to change paths brought resistance, disdain, and deep uncertainty. Life was no longer prestigious, no longer praised, but for the first time, holding a paintbrush in his hand, he knew he was alive. For Nietzsche, that mattered more than all admiration. A good life is not a life that is admired. It is a life that does not betray itself. Imagine an artist standing before his unfinished painting, surrounded by dozens of hands wanting to paint for him. One adds colors to fit the market. Another corrects lines to make it prettier. Another erases what he loves, because it is impractical. In the end, the painting becomes acceptable, but no longer his. Nietzsche saw this in most people. They live like artworks completed by others, and only when you dare to snatch back the brush, even if the painting is rough and unpraised, do you begin to live a life that bears your name. Nietzsche believed that a person truly lives only when they pursue what belongs to them, even if it forces them to walk alone. The crowd offers warmth, but it also drains will, creativity, and individual identity. A good life is not one that blends in easily. It is one that leaves you unashamed when you face yourself. Living according to Nietzsche does not mean living to please everyone, but living so you no longer have to hide from yourself. The greatest danger is not failure, but waking up one day and realizing you spent your entire life fulfilling someone else's dream. And the question Nietzsche forces you to confront is not, "What do people think of me?" but, "Am I living my own life or not?" When you dare to pursue your own goals, you cut the invisible cord binding you to the herd. You no longer live to be approved, you live to become. This journey is often lonely, but for Nietzsche, solitude is not a punishment. It is the sign that at last, you have entered territory that truly belongs to you. And what about you? If this section makes you realize you have lived too long under someone else's shadow, leave a single word in the comments: freedom. Not to prove anything to anyone, but as a silent commitment that from today on, you will no longer allow anyone to write your goals, your dreams, or the life you were born to live. But the moment a person begins to create their own values and goals, a more subtle obstacle immediately appears. They may turn this new value system into dogma and imprison themselves in another cage, harder, more dangerous, because this time they call it truth. Number 5. Keep the mind open, resist dogma and rigid beliefs. Nietzsche believed that what ruins human life is not a lack of belief, but clinging to beliefs as if they were never allowed to change. Even the values you create for yourself, if frozen in place, will eventually turn against you. A mind that refuses to examine itself will soon turn strength into stagnation and freedom into a new framework. For Nietzsche, no truth is immune to questioning, not even your own. Inhuman, all too human, he warned of this with a line so sharp it allows no escape. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. Lies can be exposed, but rigid convictions declare themselves to be right, and precisely because of that, they are more dangerous. When a belief is no longer tested, it stops supporting life and begins to control it. From that moment on, a person no longer lives from will, but from mental inertia. A good life, according to Nietzsche, cannot be built upon immutable molds, whether those molds call themselves religion, science, tradition, or even a personal value system. The world is always in motion, and human beings mature only when their minds are flexible enough to look back, to doubt, and to be willing to break even the very things that once allowed them to stand. A closed mind does not create a strong person. It creates a stable but exhausted one, correct, yet no longer alive. Imagine entering a vast library, yet spending your entire life reading only one book, then believing you understand the world. You may memorize every line, but your vision is still no wider than that book's cover. Nietzsche viewed stubbornness in belief in exactly this way. It gives you a sense of certainty, but the price is a life quietly narrowed without your awareness. The problem is not that you believe, but that you stop asking questions. Nietzsche did not oppose religion, nor did he deny science. What he attacked was any system that demands human beings stop thinking. When religion becomes fear of punishment, when science turns into something not allowed to be questioned, when tradition becomes a reason to repeat actions without understanding, then for Nietzsche, this is no longer knowledge. It is obedience made legitimate. And obedience, even when wrapped in moral or rational language, always stands in opposition to spiritual freedom, the foundation of a good life. The journey of Alan Watts is a clear illustration of this spirit. Trained in Christian theology, Watts soon realized that a single lens was insufficient to understand human nature. Instead of defending his early beliefs like a fortress, he chose to leave the priesthood and step into a journey without a map, studying Eastern philosophy, researching psychology, reading poetry, and experiencing what dogma had once forbidden. That willingness to keep his mind open gave him a vision deep enough to shake how the West understood the self and existence. Had Watts chosen safety, he would have merely repeated a familiar sermon. But because he dared to break the frame, he became a voice with real impact, something Nietzsche would certainly have admired. For Nietzsche, keeping an open mind does not mean accumulating more information or chasing every new viewpoint. It is the ability to not sanctify any belief, including your own. He believed that a good life requires human beings to continually re-examine what they believe, to ensure that those beliefs are still strengthening the life within them rather than turning into a burden. A belief that was right at 20 may become a chain at 40. And only a sufficiently open mind will recognize when it is time to let go. Nietzsche did not call for indefinite skepticism in which all values dissolve. He aimed at something far more demanding: disciplined spiritual freedom. Freedom from rigid truths handed down without understanding. Freedom from commands obeyed only out of fear. A good life does not require you to believe less, but to take deeper responsibility for what you believe. When people are courageous enough to open the door of the mind, they will encounter an uncomfortable truth. Maturity lies not in defending old beliefs at all costs, but in the ability to revise them as one evolves. Nietzsche wanted you to live as someone unafraid to tear down the mental walls you once relied on. For only when the mind is not frozen can a person learn, adapt, transform, and continue living a life that does not petrify inside its own truths. Number 6. Dare to embrace your dark side. When a person is no longer imprisoned by borrowed beliefs and ready-made moral frameworks, Nietzsche believed that a far more difficult test begins. Not a test imposed by society, nor by good and evil, but a test of inner force. From that moment on, the greatest threat no longer comes from outside, but from the life energies that were suppressed for too long and are now demanding the right to exist. Nietzsche did not view the dark side as a flaw to be hidden. He saw it as raw energy, and raw energy always presents an uncompromising choice. Either it is denied and turns inward to destroy, or it is placed under discipline and becomes strength. The issue is not whether you have a dark side. The issue is whether you allow it to rule you, or whether you have the capacity to forge it. He identified a core paradox of traditional morality. Humans are taught that their primal instincts, desire, passion, anger, are sins to be eliminated. In doing so, they are cut off from the very forces that create a powerful life. Courage, creativity, the will to overcome, none of these are born from sterile purity. They are born from forces once labeled evil. Nietzsche once wrote, "In every man a child is hidden that wants to play. That child is not a symbol of moral innocence, but of the instinct to test, to break, to cross limits. And when you suffocate it in the name of morality, you do not become nobler, you split yourself in two." Nietzsche fiercely attacked what he called slave morality, a value system that turns ambition into sin, strength into suspicion, and the will to rise into selfishness. But he never believed that destroying instinct would make humans better. On the contrary, suppressed energy does not disappear, it accumulates. And when it erupts in distorted forms. Those who pretend to be gentle are often more dangerous than those who know exactly where their aggression lies. The story of Danielle is a typical illustration of this tragedy. She grew up within frameworks imposed by family and religion. Do not get angry. Do not compete. Do not express ambition. On the surface, this was morality. Inside, it was a suffocated life. Danielle remained silent when oppressed, endured when overshadowed, and called that self-erasure selflessness. Until one day, the anger suppressed for too long exploded in a meeting, not because she became worse, but because denied instinct always seeks its return. Nietzsche would not call that moment a fall. He would call it the inevitable consequence of a life that had long denied its own vitality. Nietzsche did not need modern science to prove this. For him, Observing human beings was enough. Emotions and instincts that are denied always return as loss of control, while instincts that are forged create endurance and inner density. Emotion does not need to be destroyed, it needs to be ordered. Nietzsche never called on people to become bad. He called on them to become whole. A whole person is not someone innocent, but someone who knows what they are capable of, and does not let instinct take the wheel. The urge to dominate can become leadership. Violent impulses can become martial arts. Desire can become a creative force, but only when all of it is bound to serve a higher will. What Nietzsche demanded was not follow your instincts, but master them. A person who lives well is not one without a dark side, but one who does not allow that dark side to determine the shape of their life. They do not condemn instinct, they question it. If this force is not forged, whom will it destroy? And if it is forged, what can it build? To live according to Nietzsche is to refuse to split oneself into a good me and a bad me. There is only me, with all the life forces waiting to be forged into a deliberate form. And when a person is brave enough to look directly at what they once feared, they do not become darker. They become dangerous in Nietzsche's sense, difficult to manipulate, difficult to break, and no longer in need of hiding. If these ideas make you realize that what has been binding you is not the world, but the shadow you were afraid to face, leave a like, not to be praised, but as a silent affirmation to yourself. I have the courage to look directly at what I once avoided. Nietzsche would see that as the moment true maturity begins, when you stop running from instinct and start learning how to lead it. Number 7. Be patient with the process of becoming. But even when a person has the courage to face their own darkness, Nietzsche knew there was one final thing capable of destroying an entire life: impatience. No one lives well after a single moment of awakening. And this is what few want to hear. But Nietzsche always said plainly, living well is not a leap, but a process. From the moment you recognize instinct to the moment you are able to forge it, lies a long, harsh path that cannot be rushed. You cannot command the soul to mature simply because you are eager to arrive. No seed sprouts because the one who planted it lacks patience. You can water it more, bend down to check on it every day, but that does not make it grow faster. It may even tempt you to pull it out to see how it's doing. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Impatience is not motivation, it is how people sabotage their own process. They want to change their life in a week, to become strong after a few pages of reading, to find peace after a few meditation sessions. But a hurried soul understands nothing about becoming. A child cannot run before it can stand. A human being cannot fly before learning how to fall. If you observe life closely, you will see countless examples of failure caused by impatience. People who train for a few weeks and quit because nothing has changed. People who meditate for a month and give up because the mind is still chaotic. People who start a new path and stop because no one notices. Nietzsche would look at them for a long time and say something uncomfortable. It is not that you lack ability, you lack the patience for ability to take shape. Most growth dies not because it is wrong, but because it is abandoned just before it begins to form. The story of Amelia illustrates this clearly. After a collapsed marriage and a stalled career, she decided to rebuild her life from the ground up. But after 6 months, every change felt too small to register as progress. Only when a teacher said plainly, "The seed does not know you are impatient. It only knows how to grow at its own pace," did Amelia realize that her hurried expectations were what exhausted her. A year later, real changes began to appear. The mind steadier, endurance stronger, direction clearer. What once looked hopeless was simply not yet time. Nietzsche would not call that a miracle. He would call it the law of becoming. A lyric from Coldplay's Fix: "You may touch this spirit, lights will guide you home." But Nietzsche would cut through the final illusion. No one fixes you. No light appears before you are strong enough to walk through darkness. And no maturity occurs if you do not accept the slow, dry, sometimes brutal rhythm of the process. For Nietzsche, patience is not a weak virtue. It is a form of durable mental discipline. A good life is not measured by the speed of change, but by the ability not to quit when results are not yet visible. True transformations are always quiet. Your reactions slow down. Fear no longer controls you as easily. You stop punishing yourself for every mistake. No fireworks, no applause. Only foundations slowly taking shape. Nietzsche did not promise a perfect version of the human being. He said something harder. Human beings are never finished. Maturity is a chain of small, honest choices repeated over time. There are advances no one sees. There are phases that are dull, heavy, and painful. But it is precisely these steps that create character. The impatient want results without process. Those who live well understand that the process is what forges them. Nietzsche would say, "The strong are not those who arrive fastest, but those who do not stop simply because they are moving slowly." And if there is one final thing Nietzsche wanted you to remember here, it is this: be patient with yourself, as with something precious that is growing. Not because it is fragile, but because if you break its rhythm, you will never know who you could have become. If you have come this far, perhaps you have touched what Nietzsche wanted humanity to understand. Living a good life is not about accumulating what pleases the world, but about having the courage to stop living a life imposed by others. The steadiness of a soul is not found in explosive moments, but in the times you stand like stone, unmoved by expectation, undirected by fear. A good life, according to Nietzsche, is not a reward for the obedient, but the consequence of those who dare to live truthfully. It is the ability to face truth even when it hurts. The freedom to choose your own goals even when the world turns away. And the patience to walk a long path, one without applause, yet where the soul is quietly forged day by day. If these lines cause something subtle to shift within you, share them with someone exhausted from living a life programmed by others. And if you want to continue the journey of building a life that is deep, real, and strong, subscribe to walk with us along the path Nietzsche called the sovereignty of the soul. Because in the end, a good life is not something given. It is a life you are brave enough to write yourself and to accept full responsibility for everything you have written.